Hi, I'm Allie. Join me in creating Cheryl's lovely Hubble Stitch Crystal Stretch Bracelet. So this Crystal Stretch Bracelet is going to be utilizing Hubble Stitch, but you can do the same thing with right angle weave. If you need any supplies, like some of the Elonga stretch string that we'll be using, go ahead and look below the video in the description to shop with us online. We have a little link there that will get you all the products listed in this video and the quantities that you need. Gather up everything on your bead on it board and let's get ready to begin. So for her design, Cheryl ended up stitching the whole bracelet with some dragon thread and then just did a back section here with the Elonga thread where it is stretchy. So the whole bracelet is not stretchy, just a portion of it to stretch on and off the wrist. This is one option to do. I'm going to be doing the whole thing with stretchy to show you another option. We're going to be working with size 2mm Potomac crystal bicones as well as 8 OC beads. I have a big eye needle here, and there are two sizes of the Elonga stretch string. We're going to be working with the thinner, the 0.3mm, as we create this design. We will be adding string to it, so we'll be tying on to the knot, but I'm going to start out with about 4 feet of the Elonga thread, and we'll get ready to begin our Hubble stitch. To get started, I have on about 4 feet of my Elonga 0.3mm, and I have that on one of the Bead Tech Big Eye needles. I have 8 OC beads and 2mm crystals sitting here, and I'm going to start out the pattern by adding on 2 of my 8 OC beads and then 1 of my 2mm crystals. I'm going to let that go down the whole entire length of the stretch here, holding and just letting about 6 inches or so at the end of the stretch. I'm going to then go back up through bead number 1, coming out prior to bead number 2. From here, I'm going to add bead number 4, which is going to be another one of my 2mm crystals, and then I'm going to sew down through bead number 2, which bead number 2 again is going to be another one of my 8 OC beads. And this has a very silky dental floss feel to it. So when you're working with it, you're going to want to pull, but you don't want to pull super tight. You'll be able to stretch it off and on once you have it going. From here, you're going to add your next Hubble unit, which is going to be 2 of bead number 1, or 2 of 8 OC beads, so beads 1 and 2, and then bead number 3 is your 2mm bead. We're going to let that drop down next to our project. Take our thread and needle once again back through bead number 1 toward bead number 2, which is our second 8 OC bead. Grab another 2mm bead and then sew down through bead number 2. And that's going to sit right there in the middle. You see how it kind of looks like there are little angels or football players with the wings facing in a V? You want to make sure that you keep track of what your process looks like and what the position is of those crystals, especially as we get to row number 2. I'll keep track of that. From here, we're going to do our third row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows is what Cheryl did. I'm going to do 3 just to show you that variety. I'm going to drop those 2 beads down. Again, sew up between beads 1 and 2. Coming on out. And then once again, add bead number 4, which is the second one of your 2mm beads, and sew down through bead number 2 of that gold 8-0. Now from here, we're going to step up and we're going to make another row of this project. I want you to sew through bead number 3, which is the crystal at the bottom. And this is where you want to use that thinner Elonga. You want to go up through bead number 1. And then I want you to come out through bead number 4, that top 2mm bead. If you need help with this Hubble stitch, make sure that you check out some of the other videos that are linked on that description landing page, that little link to our website. We have other helpful videos that are there to help you along with this design. From here, we're going to step up and do our next row. What was the top of the last Hubble stitch row is going to be the bottom of our next row. This time we're going to add 2 of our seed beads, and this one is going to be bead number 3. We're going to sew through, rather than adding bead number 3, sew through bead number 3. From here, we're going to sew back up through bead number 1, just like we've been doing through that first seed bead. Bring our stretchy string out, add bead number 4, and sew down bead number 2. Once again, add 2 more gold beads, go into the top of the Hubble Stitch row below. That's going to be your bead number 3. And then you're going to exit again, taking your needle and thread through bead number 1, that first 8-0 seed bead. And you'll notice I'm just kind of gently pulling at my stretch, making sure there's no big loops that are in it or missing areas, but I don't want to pull it so tight that I snap it before I'm even wearing it. Go in then and add bead number 4 in between those 2 8-0 seed beads. And once again, repeat. 2 8-0s get added in this pretty Aztec color. Sewing towards the second row, I'm going to go into the top or bead number 4 of the first row. Just kind of pull that starter thread there. Get those beads in place. So back up then through bead number 1, rounding it out, connecting that row to the previous one. Add 1 more 2mm bead and sew down through bead number 2. As you do that, we're going to get ready to once again increase our row. To increase our row and add on to the top, what I'm going to do is suggest that you move your needle and your stretchy string so that it's coming out the right-hand side, so you're always staying consistent. From here, circle around through the bottom bead number 4. That's already there. You're going to sew up through seed bead number 1. And then once again, come out through crystal bead number 4. From here, starting your next row, 2 seed beads go on, link back through bead number 3. Again, you're always traveling kind of towards you. And then once again, sew up through bead number 1. And it's just the same stitch over and over. I have that other Hubble Stitch video in case you want to go in and check that out. And you're just continuing on, adding your 2 beads, sewing back through bead number 3, which is going to be the top of the previous row, toward the row you just completed. Back up through bead 1 and adding on. Now, as you can see, as I get the rows, here's where I'm starting to pull just a little bit more to maintain that stretchiness to the project. Go down through the next bead. And once again, add 2 more beads. Circle back through the bead from the previous Hubble row as we add this next one on our column. Up through bead number 1, add bead number 4, which is another crystal. And as you're doing so then and giving a tight pull, flip it over. So once again, you're sewing from right to left. I'm going to continue building and building with the same Hubble stitch, and then I'll show you how we're going to connect the ends. Once again, in her design, Cheryl decided to bead the whole thing with our dragon thread, white color. And then in the back here, she used the thicker of the Elonga right there and just did all seed beads there, thicker Elonga, and just did a 1.5 inch section where it's stretchy, and the rest of the bracelet is on regular thread. As you're progressing with the design, if you're using the Elonga material, you're going to notice that unlike other materials, I should say, that I'm not having a fraying issue going through the crystals and going through the seed beads. I did just tie a knot together as I was working on this and continued on as normal, just a regular overhand knot, knotting the 2 together. What I did was clip it down close, and then I will drop a tad bit of glue on that as I progress with the design. You want to keep in mind whether or not you're doing the whole thing as stretchy like I am, or just an 1.5 inch section with some of the thicker Elonga like Cheryl did, that it's going to need to be bigger pretty much than your wrist. You want it a little bit bigger so that way you can stretch it on and off to wear the design. So I'm continuing on. Right now I'm almost right about 5.5 inches when I get done this last row. And I'm going to continue on knowing that I want it to be about 6.25. I'm going to continue the whole way to 7 because it will stretch and I will be able to put that on a fair amount, but I want it to stay closed when it is on me. So I will go ahead and to get a 6.5, I'll do an extra 1/4 to 1/2 inch bigger to be able to stretch over my wrist. If you are doing something where you're only doing a portion of it where it has the stretchy material, you're going to want to do a little bit more than that extra 1/2 inch. Once you have the length that you need of your stitch, whether or not you're doing right angle weave or Hubble stitch, you're going to need to stitch the two ends together. So I have the last one that I'm coming out of my last 4th bead of that 3rd row of my Hubble stitch. And I'm going to go back to the beginning and look here and seam the two pieces together. Now I want this to stretch on and be flat. So when you're looking at it, you don't want any twists in it. And what I'm going to do is continue on with my last row, and we're going to start to seam it on to the beginning. So I'm going to add my 2 beads like I would normally be doing, go back through that bead that my thread was coming out of, get that start of my herringbone stitch or my Hubble stitch, and then as I'm coming out of bead number 1, I'm going to go to the other side, and instead of adding another bicone, I'm going back to the beginning of the project and connecting the two together. Sewing down then bead number 2. So it's just like sewing a button, seaming the two together. Coming out here, remember I'm on the right hand side. So I'm adding my 2 beads, sewing back through the base or the row of the Hubble stitch prior. As I do that and give a little pull, I'm going to sew back through bead number 1, just like normal. And I know it looks a little bit backwards because I'm trying to keep it in line here for you to look at. And then here I'm coming out the top. I'm going to go over to the opposite end, grab that first crystal there, and that's going to be bead number 4 of this Hubble unit. And then I come back down bead number 2 like normal. Once again, 2 8/0s. I'm going back through the bead that's already there. That's going to be bead number 3 in my stitch. Get that starter string out of here. And then I'm going back up through beads number 1 and 2. You can see I haven't pulled tight. I still have that gap a little bit in there. I give a little tight pull to close that seam up. Instead of adding a new crystal as bead number 4, I'm going back to the first crystal that was used. And then again, sewing down bead number 2. Now my starter string is there as well. So I do need to kind of pull that tight. And what I'm going to do is get the strings next to one another, but I'm also going to reinforce this section of where I'm binding them together. So I'm going to go back up through that last piece and just sew a tiny little bit back in through. If you start to notice at all that your elong is shredding, that possibly means that your elong is too thick for your beads because the crystals can kind of break at the sides. I haven't had any issues with what I'm working on, working with that size 3. Here I am at the top. I'm going to, right where my cords are together, I'm going to go in and I'm going to simply tie a knot. I'm doing an overhand knot, getting those 2 ends together. And as I do that overhand knot and get it as close as I can to the project there, I'm then going to realize that I can take my needle that's still on and I can sew into the project to kind of hide the knot. The other nice thing about the elong thread, or really any sort of stretchy, is it's really hard to tie in a knot because it is stretchy. However, it is burnable. It is a plastic material and you can burn the edges down. So if you want to, and you want to get rid of it or get rid of the knot, you can go in with your thread burner. Be warned as you watch me kind of sew back and connect these areas again, that it will be stinky because it is burning plastic. So when I go in with my thread burner and kind of burn off the edge of the plastic, what I do actually is be careful not to burn myself, but I try to fuse the plastic together and then also create a kind of blunt end. What that's going to do is keep that then from going in and fraying. So if this is my end here, where I've kind of woven back in, I can weave back and forth if I want to more. I'm going to go in and I'm going to use my thread burner, cut that down. See how much smoke that had? Still rising. Going to set off the smoke alarm here. And going in then, I'm going to pull that little tail out, heat up my thread burner, take my handle off of that end because it's still hot and it'll burn quick, and then burn that down. I'll do the same thing on the other end, putting the big eye needle on and sewing it back through a little bit more, this little tail here, and then my bracelet is completed. So whether or not you want to do a full stretch bracelet, or you want to do like Cheryl did here, using the thicker Elong, and she just used 8/0s along the back of that Hubble stitch because the crystals were difficult to get that much of the cord through. But you can see it's so pretty no matter how many designs you, or how many different layers you do and how many different rows you do. And it's nice because it will stretch onto your skin. Lots of different stitches can be done with this, and then go in and change it up, the amount of rows, the amount of, you can do herringbone, you can do peyote stitch with it, you can even do some right angle weave with it as well. So I really enjoyed using this Elong thread and playing with making our seed beaded designs stretchy. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and making this crystal stretch bracelet. Remember, if you do want any of the materials or links to any of the products, go ahead below the video and look at that description. You'll get a link to our website, which will give you all that pertinent information that you're looking for. As always, comment below and let us know suggestions, ideas, questions, and help build this amazing beading community. Don't forget that you can subscribe so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for our next inspirational design.